This morning, I listened to the remarks by Senator Schumer, the minority leader, and for a minute while listening to this, I was worried that Senator Harry Reid was back disguised as Senator Schumer. After all, I used to hear a lot of false comments about the Judiciary Committee's work from the misinformed former minority leader. This year, the minority leader first fretted that this senator, as chairman of the Judiciary Committee, would be twisted by leadership in the course of reviewing of Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court. Of course, that's false. But it was strange to hear a complaint about leadership intervening in committee business from a Democratic leader who appears to be doing just that. As far as his other comments on the Supreme Court confirmation process, I'd like to reiterate a few points that I made over the last couple weeks. Senate Judiciary Committee will have a thorough, modern, and efficient process for reviewing Judge Kavanaugh's qualifications. As I explained yesterday, senators already have access to Judge Kavanaugh's 307 opinions that he offered over a 12-year period of time that he's been on the D.C. Circuit judge, the hundreds more opinions that he joined, and of course 6,168 pages of material that he submitted as part of his Senate Judiciary Committee questionnaire. And for the benefit of the public, if you want to get into the weeds on this stuff, you can go to the Judiciary Committee's website and get all this information I just mentioned. These materials are the most relevant to assessing Judge Kavanaugh's legal thinking. We expect to receive more than 1 million pages of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time in the White House counsel's office and the Office of Independent Counsel. This will be the largest document production in connection with a Supreme Court nominee ever. By comparison, we received only about 170,000 pages of White House records for Justice Kagan. But Democratic leaders want gratuitous and unnecessary paper from Judge Kavanaugh's time as White House staff secretary. This is an unreasonable request, and I think they know it. Democratic leaders are already committed to opposing Judge Kavanaugh. We have Minority Leader Schumer himself saying that he would fight Judge Kavanaugh, quote, with everything he's got, end of quote. Yesterday, one colleague said that supporting Judge Kavanaugh is complicit in evil. That's quite an offensive statement. Doesn't sound like they're interested in assessing Judge Kavanaugh's qualifications with what everybody ought to approach this with an open mind. Their bloated demands are an obvious attempt to obstruct the confirmation process. And it gets worse. The Democratic leaders are even demanding to search each and every email from other White House staffers that even mentions Judge Kavanaugh while he served in the White House. That's beyond unreasonable. And such a request would not help us understand the nominee's legal thinking. And shouldn't that be what we're concentrating on? You want to know what kind of a justice a person's going to be on the Supreme Court? That involves his approach to all the legal matters that he has to confront now and if he gets on the Supreme Court. The Obama administration, with Senator Democrats' strong backing, refused to produce such records for Justice Kagan's confirmation. And this stunning demand is clear evidence that the Democratic leaders aren't interested in anything but obstruction. Democratic leaders insist on all these extra documents because the Senate received Justice Kagan's relative White House records in 2010. But let me point out to you that there is a significant difference between this nomination, serving 12 years already on a court, and Justice Kagan, who was not a judge. And of course, not being a judge, had no judicial track record for us to follow. She was a very esteemed dean of law school at Harvard University. That's very prestigious and shows a lot of high qualifications, but not a record as a judge to go through. There was a higher need for additional information that might shed light on her legal thinking then. Judge Kavanaugh, by contrast, has offered more than 300 opinions and joined in hundreds more. The staff secretary is undoubtedly an important and demanding position, as Judge Kavanaugh himself and many others have referred to. But staff secretary documents are not very useful in showing Judge Kavanaugh's legal thinking. His primary job as staff secretary at the White House was not to provide his own advice. Instead, he was primarily responsible for making sure that documents prepared by other executive branch offices were presented to the president. In addition to being the least relevant to assessing Judge Kavanaugh's legal thinking, the staff secretary documents contain among the most sensitive White House documents. They contain information and advice sent directly to the president from a wide range of policy advisors. Democratic leaders now say they want to follow the so-called Kagan rule, or the Kagan standard, but seem to forget how we approached that nomination. Republicans and Democrats alike agreed to forego a request for her Solicitor General document because of their sensitivity. Senators Leahy and Sessions, because they were the ranking Republican and chairman at the time, came to that agreement, even though Justice Kagan had no judicial record to review. And they agreed to these terms despite Justice Kagan's own statement that her tenure in the Solicitor General's office would provide insight into the kind of justice she would be. Obviously, with his long record on the D.C. Circuit, Judge Kavanaugh doesn't have this problem. There's plenty of paper for people to observe the kind of person you could expect him to be on the Supreme Court. The need for confidentiality is substantially higher for documents passing through the staff secretary's office than the Solicitor General's office. Under the precedent set by Justice Kagan, we shouldn't expect access to staff secretary records. We already have access to a voluminous judicial record, and we'll have access to the largest document production for a Supreme Court nominee ever. The Democrats' demand for even more documents are unreasonable and clearly intended to obstruct this confirmation process. I yield the floor.